What are we discussing on today's Locked on Diamondbacks podcast? Where is the sense of urgency in players who need to wake up the last week of the regular season?
You are Locked on Diamondbacks, your daily Arizona Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. You're listening to who? The always charismatic host of this podcast, Millard Thomas. I'm a multimedia journalist and I'm a graphic designer, so please go check out my website, millardthomas24.myportfolio.com. On there you can see all my latest work, from my packages to my articles to my photos and my graphic design. This episode is brought to you by Booking.com. Booking.yeah. The right stay can make you a fan of any city, even your baseball rivals. Book today on Booking.com, the official accommodation partner of Major League Baseball. Get the Booking.com app today. On today's Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, we'll be talking about the Dbacks' sense of urgency or lack thereof, roster battles for the final week, and players who need to wake up this final week of the season. Thank you for making Locked on Diamondbacks your first listen every day. I would not be able to do this podcast without you, my loyal listeners, sharing, subscribing, reviewing, doing all that so I could do this podcast for you. Thank you. It's free. It's available on all platforms, so please continue to tell your friends. And one of those platforms is YouTube. Please hit subscribe to Locked on Diamondbacks on YouTube. But now let's get into the game and talk about game number one against the San Francisco Giants. Let's get into the podcast and talk about it, because this was a very frustrating game to watch by Arizona. Not a lot of games on the docket tonight. A great opportunity for the D-backs to gain a little momentum in the NL wildcard race. No other teams in the wildcard race were playing tonight. D-backs could have increased their lead a little bit, felt good about themselves for the final week of the season, but no. Instead, they go out there, they crap the bed in game number one against San Fran, and now you look at the standings, they are back to third in the wild card race and only a game and a half lead on Atlanta. I just want to ask the D-backs, where is your sense of urgency? The D-backs are playing like they have the division locked up, like they're going to be the first round bye, like they have a 20-game lead. They're playing like they are the Boston Celtics from the NBA regular season. Like, I don't understand the lack of urgency right now by Torey Lovullo and what we saw in game number one by this D-backs team, because I get it. Ketel Marte coming back from injury. Ankle may not be fully healthy, so you want to rest him. But unless he's actually hurt, unless he's actually limping out there, if he's healthy and he's coming off this 3-game heater where he's hitting a home run every single night, I don't think you could just sit Ketel Marte right now. Unless he's actually hurt, I understand his health and, being cautious with him for the future. But there's not going to be a future to this season if Ketel Marte continues to ride the bench. There's only 6 games left, and we can't just be sitting our best stars. I know he's coming off the injured list, but if it's just general soreness, I don't know if that's enough to constitute him sitting down unless he's actually hurt. If he's feeling good, if he's feeling healthy, we need Marte and his bat out there. And if you're not going to do that, you have to at least stack the lineup with your best D-backs players. And tonight, I don't know why when we went to pinch hitting situations, we didn't go to Marte, the first one off the bench. I don't know why we didn't go to Randall Grichuk, who's the best pinch hitting player in Major League Baseball. Why was he not the first guy off the bench either? We went to Josh Bell first, and he's the guy who's been struggling this month. And I didn't really understand the decision-making too much by Torey Lovullo. And I understand Lourdes Gurriel, he's also coming off the injured list, so you don't want to play him every single day. But can we get a Randall Grichuk in the lineup, please? Like, this man never gets to play at all, it feels like. Can we get him in the lineup just a little bit when it feels like he swings a hot bat every single game he plays? And then the defense tonight by the D-backs. I mean, inside the park home run given up by Matt Chapman. I know it wasn't like the D-backs were just lollygagging to the ball, but you're in a tight playoff race, and stuff like that is happening to you, like it wasn't a good look by the D-backs tonight when they are such in a tightly contested race in the NL wild card. The Mets have been playing so well. The Padres have been playing so well. The Braves are right there on your heels. They're breathing down your neck, and you're having games where you're not playing your best player. You're not even going to your best guys off the bench in pinch hitting situations. And the bullpen, you look at who is coming in tonight: Scott McGuff, Brandon Hughes, like not your good relievers at all. And I just don't understand the lack of urgency that we saw from the D-backs tonight. Like, again, this is going to be one of those games where if the D-backs miss the postseason, you could look at tonight and just say, yeah, that's one of those games why the D-backs missed the playoffs. This could be a very sad collapse if the D-backs will miss the postseason. I'm praying they just do what they did last year, where they ended the season on a losing streak, but they still back their way into the postseason somehow. Erod did not have himself a good day either. 103 pitches, and guess what? Didn't even complete 5 innings, 5 earned runs, 8 strikeouts. He's been garnering up the K's, been putting away dudes. Like, he has been striking out a ton recently. 11 strikeouts and 7 strikeouts in his 2 starts prior. So you look at his last 3 starts, he's racking up the K's. But as always, not pitching deep into ball games. Now he's giving up home runs, 3 allowed in this game number 1. Just not good, Erod, and he has been shaky, and that's why we'll talk about in segment number 2, potentially Erod versus Ryan Nelson for the last spot in the D-backs rotation once we get to the postseason, but we'll save that for segment number 2. But overall, just not a good game by the D-backs to set the tone for this series against the Giants. Game number 2, tough matchup. You're going to see the Giants' best starter on the mound in Logan Webb, who is a stud, one of the most underrated pitchers in the sport, and a guy very familiar, right, against the D-backs, plays us a ton. He has been maybe not as dominant recently, has actually been kind of scuffling in the month of September. So that does help the D-backs case. I mean, this is a guy who currently leads the National League in innings pitched, led the National League in innings pitched last year, 192 innings pitched the year prior, leads the NL in batters faced right now. So this is a guy with a large workload on his arm. The last 3 seasons, and maybe right now, he's hitting himself a little bit of a wall as we enter the final stages of the 2024 regular season. So even though Logan Webb is a stud, going against Brandon Pfaadt, who was really good against Milwaukee, could be a great opportunity to actually get after Logan Webb and attack him, because he might be a little bit vulnerable considering we're at the end of the season with the workload he's taken on the last 3 years. And now we'll talk about Ryan Nelson versus Jordan Montgomery for the last spot in the rotation in segment number 2. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. All right. Let's get back to the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast, and let's talk about some D-backs position battles that we're still witnessing here in the final week of the regular season, because we've talked about this on previous podcasts for this month of battles that we're keeping an eye on for who should make the D-backs roster, specifically in the D-backs rotation and some bench spots. So let's talk about it, because there was really just 2 big battles, I guess, that we were concerned with. The first one was who's going to be like that last position player, Pavin Smith versus Josh Bell versus Luis Guillermo. We had a discussion about what direction were the D-backs wanting to go in, right? Because we knew once Lourdes Gurriel came back, we weren't going to be able to keep all 3 of them. And Pavin Smith was swinging the best bat, but he was also a guy who you could probably just send back down to AAA if you really want to. He was also the worst defensive option of the three. Uh, I mean, offensively, it's not like he has a great profile, even though he's swinging a good bat this season. We typically would say he's not a high ceiling offensive player, but he was riding a hot streak. But I think defensively was probably his biggest weakness. Josh Bell, he was the guy where you said, okay, he's got the pop, he's got the power, can back up first base for Christian Walker. He was a pretty easy guy to make an argument for to be on the roster. And then the last guy was Luis Guillorme, elite glove, but really didn't have the offensive, you know, aptitude of some other guys. And so I think when you looked at that battle, it really came down to Pavin Smith versus Guillorme. It felt like it was very easy to make the case for Josh Bell as a longtime veteran, an all-star, a guy with major power potential. Like, I think it was very easy to make the case for Josh and to keep him on the team. But for Pavin Smith and Luis Guillormes, they had both pros and cons on as to whether or not they should be on this D-backs roster. And ultimately, the D-backs chose to go with Pavin Smith. And we've seen how much playing time he's gotten recently. Guillorme now off the team, and Pavin Smith has really been in an elevated role over the last few weeks. And it does make me feel a little weird because guys like Eugenio Suarez have been hot for 3 months, has turned into Babe Ruth, and he has struggled to crack the top five in the lineup, right? He's batting sixth or seventh every night. Pavin Smith is penciled into number five every single night after a couple of good weeks. And I just thought it was a little crazy how easy it was for Torey Lovello to put Pavin Smith so high in the lineup, but guys like Eugenio was never always in the best spot. And even guys like Jake McCarthy has batted seventh a bunch this season when he's been one of the better players for the D-backs. I just feel like Pavin Smith gets such a long leash at times, and this season it has really paid off. And Pavin Smith has been very impressive. And I don't know how long it's going to last, but for right now, he's fine. And I think the D-backs chose to go with his offense, despite his defensive limitations and him looking weird in the corner outfields. I felt like they chose to, you know what, let's have this guy, his bat, let's put him on the bench in the postseason because guess what? We saw last year a guy off the bench in a big pinch hitting situation can turn the tide for you in a postseason series. We saw it with Alec Thomas and a number of guys in situations last year in the playoffs. And for the D-backs, Guillorme, Pavin Smith, they're both not going to be playing every day probably once we get to the postseason. So in a single game situation, in a big clutch moment, who do you trust more? Yes, Guillorme could be used as a late game defensive substitution, but the moment where we might need them more is a spot where we might need like a big RBI in a clutch runners in scoring position situation. And Pavin Smith is more likely to come through in that area. So I see why the D-backs decide to keep Pavin over Luis Guillorme, even though Guillorme turned into a little bit of a fan favorite toward the end of his tenure here with Arizona. So he will be missed in the desert. Then the other final battle, I think it's going to be Erod versus Ryan Nelson for that last spot in the D-backs rotation because Zach Allen, he feels like he's starting to turn a corner. He's been better recently. He still has these up and down games, but his ability to put away guys and command pitches, his velocity, like overall, his stuff just seems to be in a better place. And Zach Gallen seems to be a lot more confident in his stuff as well. Merrill Kelly, we know he's dealing with the cramps and the health issues at times, but recently when he's been healthy and has been pitching on the mound, he has looked really good for the D-backs. He feels like he's turning a corner as well. Love the way Merrill Kelly has looked recently. And then Brandon Pfaadt, we know he's up and down, but this is the guy that has been healthy the most for the D-backs this season, can give them length. He has a very nasty arsenal and has been able to put guys away at a pretty good rate this season. And we saw it recently against Milwaukee when Brandon Pfaadt's on. That dude is nasty. And so I think the top three spots in the rotation, making it the same as last year's playoff rotation, I think that's a lock. Gallen, Kelly, Pfaadt, 1, 2, 3 in the D-backs playoff rotation, no doubt about it. But the final spot, because in the postseason, you typically only need 4 guys. Jordan Montgomery not going anywhere near this D-backs rotation. He's not touching it. He's not stiffing it. It's like COVID, stay 6 feet away, please, Monty. It's going to come down to Ryan Nelson versus Erod. Erod, $20 million a year for the next 4 years. big contract, but has not really lived up to it. And it felt like he was building up some momentum, but then had this start tonight where he gives up 3 home runs, and you feel like you're back to square one with Erod. Meanwhile, Jordan Montgomery, or excuse me, meanwhile, Ryan Nelson since July 1st, 3.16 ERA, over 79 innings pitched. And so if you can get Ryan Nelson back before the end of the regular season, I think that's the big thing with Ryan Nelson. When will he return? When will he come back? If he can return by that Padres series and can at least make an appearance, whether it's a start or out the bullpen, and look good over 2 innings where you feel fine about him entering the postseason, then I would ride Ryan Nelson over Erod. He won't even need to see either of them until the second round of the postseason, right? You're not going to see either one probably in the wild card round, potentially, because I think the rotation is lined up right now where Zach Gallen would start game number one in the playoffs. I think it's lined up that way. Regardless, I think the D-backs would be fine. I think we still needed to see how Ryan Nelson looks like off the injured list, but I'm definitely leaning Ryan Nelson over Eduardo Rodriguez for the final spot in the D-backs rotation. And now we'll talk about some D-backs players that need to wake up the final week of the regular season. But hey, if you're looking to make any traveling plans, then I suggest using booking.com because this episode is brought to you by booking.com. Yeah, explore those US cities you always secretly want to learn more about with hotels, bed and breakfast, vacation rentals, resorts, and so much more on booking.com. You might just find your perfect stay, even in your baseball rival city during postseason. With booking.com's wide variety of choices across the US, you can go incognito to all of your baseball rival cities. Booking.com delivers exactly the right stay for you. The right stay can make you a fan of any US city, even your baseball rivals. So check out booking.com, booking.yeah. And also, if you guys are thinking about placing a little wager on an upcoming D-backs game, maybe D-backs versus Giants game number 2, then I suggest going to FanDuel Sportsbook. Hey, NFL fans, you can start this season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right. Let's get back into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast. Let's talk about players who need to wake up the final week of the regular season because it is go time for the D-backs. We cannot wait any longer. When we talk about urgency, we need to show it right now. What more do you want? The postseason is on the line. 90-win seasons on the line. Back-to-back playoffs for only the second time in franchise history is on the line. And just October fun, all on the line. Like, who wants to sit on their couch after 162 regular season where you were so excited, where your team had you amped up to only lose the final week of the season and then have to wait months before your team comes back? Who wants to be those guys? If you're the Mets, D-backs, Padres, or Braves, one of these fan bases are going to be so disappointed come next Monday morning. They're going to be, I frustrated. Is that the right word? Heartbroken. I don't know how strong and hyperbolic you want to get, but I know if it was me, I would be an emotional wreck if I went through this 162 game season where the D-backs were the best team in baseball for a 3-month period and then they missed the postseason. I would be pissed. And so for the D-backs to not miss the playoffs, we're going to need some of our players who are currently struggling to step up this final week of the season. So let's get into the 5 guys who are struggling right now. There's actually more than that, but there are 5 guys who have my eye on that need to pick it up the final week of the season. And the first guy I want to talk about is one of my favorite players, Jake the Rake, the Snake McCarthy, who at one point felt like he was the D-backs hero for a 3-week stretch there in August, especially with the Martes out. McCarthy was carrying, but in the month of August, in the month of September, McCarthy has fallen off a cliff offensively. And entering today's game, if you take out Jorge Barosa, McCarthy has been the worst offensive player by the D-backs, according to WRC Plus, at only 43. McCarthy has really struggled this month. His strikeout percentage isn't bad, only 15%, but he's not drawing any walks. The slug has evaded him. His slugging is currently lower than his OBP. And I won't even tell you what his slugging is, but I'll tell you this. His OBP is 266 in the month of September, and his slug is lower than that. It has been a pitiful and atrocious month for Jake McCarthy, who has been so good for the D-backs this season, has been such a bright spot, has really started to hit a wall, has really started to fall off a cliff this last week. And if he could get going, we saw him get a base hit in today's game against the Giants. If he can get hot for the last few games with his ability to create chaos and havoc on the bases. His defense is very important in the D-backs outfield as well. We all love Jake McCarthy. He's a pretty clutch guy as well. Let's pray Jake McCarthy can get going this final week of the season because the D-backs desperately need his bat and his speed. The second guy I want to talk about is a guy who was really incredible for most of this D-back season, and he doesn't play a ton, but when he does, he has been really incredible. But this month of September, he has started to hit a little bit of a wall too. Jock Peterson, the guy who has taken a tour around the NL West, who was pimping home runs post All-Star break. Again, another dude who has taken a little bit of a hit in the month of September. Walk rate is fine, 7%. Strikeout rate, not terrible, 23%. That's entering today's game, but it's the slash line that you need to look at. Entering today, 237 average, 310 OBP, and a 395 slug. This is a guy that's been crushing pitches all season, but in the month of September, he's taken it a little bit slower and he started to, come back down to earth a little bit after looking like an all-star for most of this season. So for Jock, a guy who's been so clutch, a guy who has pimped big home runs, pounded his chest, called himself, right? We know how good Jock Peterson is, and he's a guy extremely, extremely important because it's not just his bat. It's also like his vitality, his presence, his spirit, the aura of Jock Peterson, and all that's increased when you're playing well. And I think they need that infectious energy that Jock Peterson has, and it's definitely more infectious when he's playing well. So would love to see him heat up this final week. And then among the pitchers, because that's all I had for the position players, I got 3 pitchers that I would love to see heat up the final week of the season. The first guy, a guy I love but has been struggling this month, Kevin Ginkel. I don't know what happened to him in the month of September. He is bookending his season with 2 terrible months because he started the season atrocious March and April with Sewald out. If you remember when we tried to make him the closer, Ginkel was bad. And now the final month of the season, he's bad again. 10.8 ERA in the month of September. That is, let me see here. Kevin Ginkel, 8 earned runs in 6.2 innings pitched. Not good enough. He's still striking out folks at a pretty good rate, but a ton of loud outs and hard contact, and not just 3 home runs allowed in the month of September, just 6.2 innings pitched. Like, that is not good, Kevin Ginkel. He needs to be better, and this is a guy that we all need to step up. He was nails last year in the postseason, right? Did not give up an earned run all last year in the playoffs. And so for the D-backs, Martinez, who we'll talk about in a second, actually. If you look at the D-backs bullpen right now, it's AJ Puck we feel the best about. It's just Martinez second. Then after that, we desperately need it to be Kevin Ginkel. Ryan Thompson, just like Ginkel, same vibe. We just need him to be better. Him and Ginkel were the 2 guys that we might have had the most trust in coming into this season in the D-backs bullpen. We were like Thompson 7th, Ginkel 8th, Sewald 9th, and Sewald was always the guy we were a little bit more shaky on. Thompson and Ginkel were 2 locks, and they were locks for most of the season. But now in the month of September, Thompson also a guy who is struggling a ton this month. 7 earned runs in 8 innings pitched for Ryan Thompson. Both of those guys are just giving up too much hard contact and walking guys and just looking out of character. D-backs need those 2 guys in the back end of the bullpen because Martinez and Puck cannot do it all. And that's why we're also seeing Martinez start to struggle a little bit because he's the third and final guy who I want to talk about here because if you look at Martinez's numbers, he's still striking out folks this month. The numbers aren't atrocious, but 5 earned runs in 9.1 innings pitched, 5 walks allowed. Like, Martinez is still a little bit shaky, and we need him to just clean up the edges of his game because he is nasty. He is competent, and it feels like the D-backs might be moving to an AJ Puck closer with Justin Martinez being your go-to high leverage reliever. But regardless, Martinez needs to be a little bit better with the stuff he possesses. He can be the D-backs closer of the future. He's that nasty, he has that kind of stuff, but he has to clean up this stuff on the edges and on the margins. And so for the D-backs, Jock Peterson, Jake McCarthy, Justin Martinez, Kevin Ginkel, Ryan Thompson. D-backs desperately need those 5 players to wake up in the final week of the regular season. Now, that's it for this edition of the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. Come back tomorrow for more Diamondbacks news coverage and insight. And as always, stay safe, stay healthy. Doses.